Well, today I'm busy starting my spring cleaning and maintenance routines. I'm working on a Honda EB3000 generator. This is probably 1980s vintage with its metal gas tanks and big black frame. Now Honda still makes a 3000 today. It's got a different letter prefix on it, and it looks completely different. Plastic housing, all of that stuff. Different engine. The only thing they have in common really is the 3000 name. It was one of Honda's best-selling generators of the 1980s and 90s. It was very popular. A lot of contractors used these. They're ideal for job sites, things like that. Now this one, I picked up a few months ago from one of those sales. They sometimes have those U-store type places, storage lockers. People don't pay their rent, so they put everything up for sale. And I picked this up for pretty much a song because it wasn't running. As it turned out, the carburetor was all gummed up and nasty shape, and somebody had over-tightened a screw, the needle, the idle adjustment, and they snapped the screw. Had to replace that. Honda has excellent parts availability, even on old stuff like this. So I had no trouble getting the screw, and the carburetor's functional again. And the inside of the gas tank wasn't all nasty and such. It was surprisingly clean. This was not a job site generator. I believe this was used by a homeowner because it just doesn't have that really beat up look that you get with a job site generator. And, it's got scratches on the paint and stuff like that. That's more from sitting in a garage for 25, 30 years and having stuff piled on it, more likely. The oil was clean. I mean, I changed the oil anyway, but it was clean. There really was no sign that this saw any kind of really heavy use. I know what that looks like from our own generators we use on the job, and this one definitely didn't have that. But Honda makes some of the best generators out there. So if you can have an opportunity to get one that really just needs work to a carburetor or something like that, it's definitely worth it. If you get it cheap, especially because you can part this out on eBay for probably about 100, 125, 150. Every part of this generator is in demand somewhere because they are so popular. So you could always part it out if you couldn't fix it. Really isn't a whole lot of risk if you're not paying too much. These early models used a flathead engine, and I believe this still has breaker points. Not sure because I haven't looked in there. There really was no reason to, but I believe some of these ones did have breakers. American ones, American motors like Briggs and stuff like that, they went to electronic in the 80s, but I don't think Honda did until the early 90s. But I'm not an expert on these. This particular model generator, I don't know if it has points or not. I changed the oil. I pulled the fuel filter out of it. I dumped it. It was clean. No problems there. I rebuilt the carburetor. Although surprisingly, the carburetor had been replaced once before by somebody. And it was new, and I guess, as happens a lot of times with homeowner generators, you get a storm, you use it for 10, 12 hours, and then it sits for the next 10, 12 years. And what happens is the gasoline in there turns to shellac and gums up everything. Guess that must have happened more than once, because they replaced the carburetor with a brand new one and let it gum up again. But not to the point where I wasn't able to clean it, fortunately. I didn't have to pay $112 for a new carburetor, so I cleaned it. It was no problem. I dunked it in Evaporust, which isn't really supposed to be used isn't supposed to work for gas deposits, but it actually worked very well and took them all off. I was very surprised. I had another smaller Honda generator I got with this one where the tank was pretty badly gummed up, and that stuff stripped all the crud out of that tank in basically a few hours. I was really surprised after having tried alcohol and all kinds of other mixes in there to clean it. From now on, that's the product I'm going to use, Evaporust. They sell it here in the States in all kinds of catalogs and at most auto parts stores. It's kind of expensive, though, so don't get sticker shock. It's like $23 for half a gallon, sometimes more. This generator, given its age, has some fairly advanced features that don't show up on most American generators for like another 20 years. Well, it has low oil shutdown, which means if it gets too low on oil, it'll automatically shut itself off. If it detects it's too, the engine could be damaged by too low of an oil amount in the crankcase. And better than that, it has a low idle feature, which means if there's no current draw on it, it will automatically lower its idle to like 1/3 of what it normally runs at. Instead of like most generators will sit there and scream at 3,700 RPM, whether you're using it or not. This one will drop its RPMs down to probably 800 to 1,000 RPM. It's not bad at all. Saves you fuel, and it saves a lot of wear and tear on the motor. And you see I was testing it. I have, a fan hooked to it, and I got that. It's important if you have small engine equipment like this, you don't just let it sit around and hope for the best, because we have ethanol-laced fuels these days. Some are 10, 15, even 20% ethanol. Ethanol turns bad very quickly. Within 6 months or less, you've got problems. it starts to shellac out and separate from the fuel and turns corrosive, and that destroys carburetors. So you really, what you got to do is you use it and then you drain it or let it run out, and then you fog it with that stuff you get at Home Depot, which is like $6 for 32 ounces, but it's ethanol-free, long-term storage fuel. It's special stuff. It's not meant to run the generator if you're lighting your house unless you really like spending money. It's meant to preserve your equipment in storage. So you pour some of that in there, you run it through the generator system, and it preserves everything very nicely. I've had good success with that stuff. I use it in everything, lawnmowers, generators, chainsaws, you name it. If it has a small engine, even some larger engines, I use it. It's worth it because the ethanol fuel is extremely destructive to all of these small engine equipment like this. And I do not want to have to rebuild the carburetor every 6 months on this thing. I had been planning to sell it, but I decided to keep it because of its advanced features. Despite its age, I really don't have a huge amount of use for generators. Every now and then as a storm comes along, knocks the power out for a few hours. Substation's not too far away. We don't lose power that often. But it's good to have an emergency standby. And I have probably 6 or 7 other generators I could sell. Both little tiny ones used for, on the job, or larger ones like a big Onan that I'll be working on next week. That needs a lot more than this one did. Well, let's fire it up and see how she runs. I don't need the gloves for that. See if I can do this one-handed. A little difficult, so bear with me here. Hold on. No, didn't want that. Oh, probably helps if you turn it on. Switch up to on. Now watch this. See how it idles down? Automatically idles down when you take the power off it. Saves a lot of fuel and wear and tear on the engine, and it's not that loud when it's like this. This is especially good if you're using it on electric heaters, things like that are intermittently on, then off, then on again. Now watch, I'll plug the light back in, and it'll idle right up. Pretty cool technology, and it's all analog. There's no computers doing that. That's all analog technology on that. There's a little vacuum thing on there that controls it. See it right there. There's your carburetor. All the rest. There we go. The Honda EB3000 from the 1980s. So if you happen to see one at a flea market or a tag sale, for that matter, pretty much any Honda, and it's cheap, grab it. You can always part it. Throw the parts on eBay. Sell them to guys like me who fix junk like this and might need something, like a carburetor or a gas tank or something like that. Use the money for get a new generator. Who knows? But there you go. The indestructible Honda EB3000. Alive again.